So you want to be a tank. You want to be the player that goes blow for blow with the big bad raid bosses. If you're interested in tanking or already tanking, but fairly new and still filled with anxiety when queuing up, this video is for you. The goal with this video is to take you from being nervous queuing into LFRs to confidently queuing up into normal and heroic raids. If you're wondering who I am or what gives me the credentials to create this guide, well, my main character is a Blood Death Knight. I'm an AOTC raider and a regular raid leader of Pugs. I'm not claiming to be the best by any means, but I am confident in my abilities and have zero issues raiding as a tank while directing the rest of the raid. Final note, everything I achieve is through Pugs, so it's not very easy. Let's get into it. The first thing we have to talk about is tanking anxiety. Now, this is something that practically every tank experiences. Even if you're familiar with the raid, the bosses, and the mechanics, you can still feel some anxiety when queuing up. Compare tanking to the other roles. As a DPS or healer, you're kind of out of the spotlight. You have a minimum of 2 other players that are filling those roles with you, and if you make a mistake or 2, you're normally fine. As a tank, it's just you and 1 other guy. A simple mistake could mean another player gets killed, and even if nobody dies, a mistake is pretty noticeable because you are the one controlling where the boss stands. Now you're probably thinking, wow, you've done absolutely nothing to relieve my anxiety. And yeah, I'm sorry. You are going to have anxiety, and there is only one way to conquer it, and that is by jumping into a raid. Everybody makes mistakes, and that's okay. We are not robots. Just pay attention to what mistakes you make and learn from them. If you get booted, shake it off and queue up for another. Your next performance will be better than your last. LFR is a great environment to develop your tanking skills. It is the most forgiving for mistakes, and I cannot stress enough that you should utilize it before queuing up for normal. So let's cover the basics. Tip 1. Threat. This is a worry with fresh tanks, but in all honesty, once you're past the first 5 global cooldowns, it really shouldn't be an issue. The initial pool is always the most dangerous in terms of threat, so have your taunt button ready in case a DPS really pops off with huge damage. Aside from that, if you're deeper into the fight and find another player or the other tank grabbing aggro from you and they're not taunting, they either severely outgear you, which is doubtful, or you are making mistakes in your rotation. And speaking of rotation, tip number 2, your rotation and you. Having the best rotation down to muscle memory is crucial to being a successful tank. Mastering your rotation increases your overall DPS, generates the maximum amount of threat, and ensures maximum survivability. So how do you find your best rotation? If you don't have someone helping or teaching you, then you are going to have to use outside resources. Wowhead is the ultimate website for discovering this, however some people do prefer Icy Veins. Use whichever you prefer. Once you have your rotation squared away, get to that training dummy and start going through your keybinds. Start slow and then slowly increase speed. Once you're more comfortable, start strafing, jumping, and adding extra movements while working through your rotation. If you want a more real experience, then track down some elite mobs or role bosses and practice. Tip number 3, defensive cooldowns. Cooldowns are something that will separate good tanks from bad tanks. A popular and incorrect playstyle is that tanks will wait until they are in danger to utilize a defensive cooldown. Once the screen flashes red and they have 30% of their HP left, they'll hit their cooldown. At this point, the other tank has probably already taunted the boss and you are no longer in mortal danger, meaning your cooldown is ticking away and not doing anything for you. However, if you pop your defensive cooldown right before the big attack happens, instead of being at 30% HP, you'll find yourself at 60% HP, giving you a more relaxed mindset and also helping out your healers. Another scenario to look out for is if you find yourself getting one-shotted by an ability that the other tank is surviving. If this is happening, there's a good possibility that your timing is just a little off, so adjust accordingly. So how many defensive cooldowns should you pop before the big attack? Well, you want to pop 1 defensive cooldown before the attack happens. I say 1 because you shouldn't have to utilize 2 defensive cooldowns to survive an attack. If you are going to stack a couple cooldowns, then you want to make sure that they are different types. The same type of cooldowns are multiplicative and not additive, and I'll explain what that means by giving you 2 examples. Scenario 1, utilizing different cooldown types. If the boss is using a tank buster that deals physical and magical damage at the same time, you should pop your physical reduction cooldown and your magical reduction cooldown at the same time, right before the attack. Doing this will greatly reduce the overall damage you take since physical and magical damage is registered separately. In this scenario, you are getting the full value of both of these cooldowns. Scenario 2, utilizing the same type of cooldown. The boss uses 2 physical damage tank busters in rapid succession. You activate 2 DRs, one a 50% reduction and one a 25% reduction for the first attack, but now have no DRs available for the second attack. This chart shows how the DRs multiply, and I'll do my best to describe it. Pause the video after the description to study further. The first attack with 2 DRs. apply the DRs to the overall damage of the attack. Let's say 1000 damage. So 1000 damage with a 50% DR results in 50% damage received, and 1000 damage with a 25% DR results in 75% damage received. Now take that 50% and multiply it by 75%, which equals 37.5%. That means you're taking 37.5% of 1000 damage. So 2 DRs takes 1000 damage to 375. Now, let me show you how it is less beneficial. You take 375 damage from the first hit and now have 0 DRs available for the second 1000 damage hit. This means you take 1375 total damage from the 2 big hits. Now let's look at alternating the same DRs. The first attack, you reduce it by a flat 50%, so you take 500 damage the first hit. The second attack, you use your 25% DR and take 750 damage the second hit. So in total, between both hits, you take 1250 damage. Therefore, you are reducing the overall value of your DRs by using the same types together. Ideally, you want to rotate through your defensive cooldowns the entire fight. You want to have a DR ready for each tank buster attack, and hopefully your first DR will be back up by the time you are using your last one. Tip number 4, positioning. Positioning is one of the most important aspects of being a tank. You have ultimate control of the boss. Unless they are stationary, you choose where they stand and which way they face. The general rule of thumb is to keep the boss facing away from the raid. This is done for 2 reasons. First, it ensures that if the boss has a frontal attack, no other players will be hit by it. And second, normally when a boss targets a non-tank player, they will very obviously turn around, thus alerting the other raid members that something is happening. Another general rule for positioning is to ensure that the boss is kept in an area that allows the DPS to have space while doing their thing. An example here would be with Larodar. His arena fills with fire that gets closer and closer to the raid. As a tank, you want to position him close to the fire to keep the spreading at a minimum, but you need to keep him in the open enough that the melee DPS don't have to stand inside the fire to deal damage. Once you have the boss in position, you want to keep them stationary as much as possible. This is to benefit the melee DPS. If they are having to constantly reposition themselves, then their DPS is going to suffer. Keep them in the same spot and only move when you have to. Keep in mind that your positioning is never absolute. While it would be great for everything to go perfectly, this is sadly not going to be the case. You should always expect the unexpected. While tanking, you should constantly be scanning the arena to see where your raid members are and where mechanics are being handled. You want to have a plan B position in your mind, so that when things finally do hit the fan, you can very quickly reposition the boss. If you aren't aware of your surroundings, then there's a good chance you'll panic and make a bad decision. Bad decisions lead to players dying or wipes, so always remain aware of what is happening so that you can remain in control of the fight. And what helps you control that fight? Tip number 5, raid knowledge. You don't want to just jump into a raid with 0 knowledge of the fight. You need to be aware of what abilities and mechanics the tank is required to do. Thankfully, there are plenty of resources to ensure that you have a heads up on what you should be doing. The in-game adventure guide, Wowhead, and YouTube. If you prefer YouTube, consider checking out my channel. I cover every boss and what you should be doing specifically as a tank. I will say that no matter how much you research, you won't fully understand the fight until you actually experience it. But take advantage of the tools that you have. Here's a bonus tip. Communication with the other tank. I feel bad even mentioning this, but I see and experience this regularly when I raid. I'll wait until the ready check hits to see if the other tank will establish some type of communication, and 9 out of 10 times they won't. By the way, I don't mind talking, and I will always whisper the other tank before pulling the boss. If there is 0 communication between the tanks, there are 2 possible scenarios that will occur after the pull timer. Scenario 1, both tanks will basically ping-pong threat back and forth until someone slacks off or has to taunt. Or scenario 2, neither tank will initiate and a DPS will be the first person with aggro, possibly killing them. So send a whisper to the other tank, just ask, hey, do you want to go first or second? If you are new and not comfortable establishing aggro and positioning, then let the other tank know that you would prefer them to tank first. It's literally that simple and saves a potential headache. So let's do a quick recap of the basics. Threat is most important at the initial pull. If you're struggling mid-battle, examine your rotation. Your rotation ensures maximum DPS, threat generation, and survival. Cooldowns should not be stacked unless the other tank is dead or they are different types. Positioning is extremely important and you should always have a plan B. You should research the boss mechanics in the raid so you aren't going in blind, use the adventure log, Wowhead, or YouTube, and finally be sure to communicate with the other tank. Those are the basics of tanking. Big shout out to these channel members. If this video has been useful to you, then please hit the like button. Subscribe so you're notified when my advanced tips guide comes out. I also have in-depth guides on each Dragonflight raid and downloadable cheat sheets for each boss. If you want to support the channel, you can become a channel member for 99 cents a month. This gives you early ad-free access to all new videos and behind the scenes goodies. I'll see you in the next one.